Hello, my name is Jim. Welcome to my Booktube channel about books and reading and stuff. O is for octopus. O is for omnivore. Omnivores like pigs and bears and sloths and skunks and rats and mice and squirrels. And our cousins the chimps and ourselves. O is the omnivore reader's tag. This is an egg. Whoever finds this egg later in the video and puts the timestamp down below, they can choose what video I should film next, the theme of the next video. So have a look out for this egg during this video. So what's the omnivore reader book tag? The omnivore reader book tag is for omnivorous readers. This is about brain food, not stomach food. Mara, of books like Woe, describes herself as an omnivorous reader, reading across many genres. This tag was started by Emma at a cup of books. She seems to be confusing reading and consuming a cup of books, an omnivorous reader, but it looks a fun tag. The idea of this tag is you choose 4 genres, ideally 4 disparate genres, and for each genre you tell what's your favourite book in this genre, what book you're currently reading or recently finished in this genre, and what book you hope to read in the future, what book's on your TBR for this genre. Yeah. The first genre I want to tackle is science fiction. Science fiction was the first genre I really got into in my teens. When I tackled the S to Z tag, I mentioned my favourite book in the science fiction genre was The Chrysalids by John Wyndham, and this is probably still true. Another book I really like in the science fiction genre is one called The Chronothon by Nathan Van Coops. The Chronothon is like Back to the Future mixed with The Hunger Games. It's about a competition where people go back in time. They have a device on their wrist to allow them to travel in time, to race through time. They have to go back to various time periods to carry out assigned objectives, and when they've completed certain tasks they have to go through the time gate to the next time period. It's not intended as a battle royale game, but something is amiss, and at each stage certain competitors are being bumped off. It's a fun read, there's a lot of humour, there's a lot of action, and I'd really recommend this. In the science fiction genre I'm currently reading Noir, which is a dark cyberpunk novel set in the future around a new metropolis of Greater Los Angeles, which is sprawled out around the Pacific Rim. It's very nihilistic. Even the central character, the protagonist, is called McNichil, who is looking for somebody. Science fiction genre, there's a couple of books I want to look for. One is Kindred by Octavia Butler. This is about African American in America who gets transported back in time to the slave era and how that works. That sounds like a fascinating premise for a novel. I'm also interested in the Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars series, which is about the terraforming of our nearest planetary neighbour, Mars. The second genre I want to look at is historical fiction. I like how reading can take us back with various fictitious characters to various eras, various epochs in our history. For this, I want to mention 2 favourites. There's one, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This takes us back to the time of Henry VIII and the Tudor period. It's a very fertile period for historical fiction. Henry VIII wants to divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn. He wants to leave England with a strong heir. And the irony is that Anne Boleyn gives him a daughter, which he's not happy about, but that daughter turns out to be Queen Elizabeth I, who becomes the heir, the queen who puts England on the map. Before Elizabeth's reign, England was just an insignificant power on the edge of Europe. But at the end of her reign, it was a world power. Under her reign, the Spanish Armada was defeated and the colony of Virginia was started in America, and this was the path to England's great success. And second book I want to mention is The Keening. The Keening by Margaret Pinard. This is a story set in Scotland at first in the 1820s about a family who live on the island of Mull, who are struggling to survive, and they're being turfed off their land by the laird, who wants to turn the land over to sheep farming, and they're forced to leave the land. First they go to Glasgow and then they move to Canada to start a new life in the new world. It's a fantastic book, the characters are very well drawn, and it's an interesting historical story. In historical fiction, a book I've recently finished is Remarkable Creatures. This is the story about Mary Anning. Mary Anning lived at the beginning of the 19th century in Lyme Regis in Dorset, and she found a lot of fossils on the beaches of Lyme Regis, and with her friend Elizabeth Philpott they started really the science of paleontology, but because they were women they weren't taken seriously, they weren't even allowed to enter the Geological Society at the time. It's a fascinating book by Tracy Chevalier, who also wrote The Girl with the Pearl Earring. A book I'd like to read in the historical fiction genre is The Wreck by Meg Keneally. This is a recent publication. I heard about it on Katie Lumsden's channel, Books and Things. It's the story of a woman who is transported to Australia and makes a success of life in Australia. It's loosely based on actual figures in Australian history, like Mary Ryby, who was transported to Australia for stealing a horse, but ended up one of the richest women in Australia. I'm interested in the whole transportation era. Robert Hughes' book, The Fatal Shore, about transportation to Australia, is one of my favourite non-fiction books. And I also love Great Expectations with the character of Abel Magwitch, who was transported to Australia. Another genre I like is the murder mystery genre. I don't have one favourite book in this genre, but I like the series of V.I. Warshawski, created by Sarah Paretsky. V.I. Warshawski is a private eye in Chicago, and I find the stories have a lot of humour, there's a lot of mystery, there's a lot of action, and I enjoy this. The last book I read in this genre was Murder in Saint-Remy by Susan Kiernan Lewis. This was about a series of murders in the south of France and the expat community, but this actually began with a birth, a mysterious birth, and yeah, it was okay. It was just a 3-star read, but it's the most recent book I've read in this genre. In the future, I'm hoping in March, because it's March in the Moderns, I want to read Strong Poison by Dorothy L. Sayers. This was published in 1930. My mother was a big fan of Dorothy L. Sayers. The final genre I want to talk about is the fantasy genre. This is a genre I read from time to time. A lot of booktubers I follow almost exclusively in the fantasy genre. There's people like Daniel Green, Gregory Lepere, Chabby Salter, Murphy Napier, Elliot Brooks. They often talk about fantasy novels. I haven't read nearly as much fantasy novels as they have, but one of my favourites recently has been The Sword of Kaigan. I can link to the review here. This was a Japanese-inspired fantasy with Japanese-style themes, and it was very gripping, very emotional. What I'm reading in the fantasy genre at the moment is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This is an urban fantasy, dark academia, occult fantasy set in the world of Yale University and their secret societies conjuring up magic. And what I hope to read in the future, I think maybe Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson's his big name in fantasy. I've read just one novella by him, Edge Dancer. He's written all these big tomes, maybe too many big tomes. I think, like Steve Donahue suggests, for a fantasy genre that any series should just be 3 tomes of no more than 600 pages. Anything more is a bit bloated, but I'd be interested to see what Mistborn is like. So that's my take on the Omnivores Readers tag. I was tagged by Paula of Draw Your Book. Thank you, Paula, for tagging me. It was an interesting tag. I'm not tagging anyone specifically this time. If you like the tag, please feel free to do it. Did anybody find the egg? Let me know. And if you like this video, you can like and subscribe below, and I'll see you on the next video. Goodbye. This is an egg.